So we're going to jump right in here and talk about media. And we're going to try to have a pretty wide-ranging, free conversation. We certainly welcome you all to jump in. And so to the extent there are any mics, there's the mic. So but before you start speaking, just wave and try to get that. I may also want to call on some people because there's people in here that could say things, and I'll try to get the mic to the person who's about to be called on. The first thing I want to do is I want to have each of the panelists quickly introduce themselves. So Susan, why don't you say?
Hi, I'm Susan Athey. I'm an economics professor at Harvard, and I'm just in the process of moving to Stanford's business school. I also consult for Microsoft in the role of chief economist, and there I work mostly on the search advertising platform.
Frank?
Hi, I'm Frank Speiser, the co-founder of SocialFlow.
And I'm Tom Bedecarré, the chairman of AKQA Innovation and Ideas Agency, and recently named president of WPP Ventures.
Okay, so what I want to do is we're going to go down the row again, and then we're not going to be so predictable in the future. But what I want each person to talk about is, relative to this topic, what do they believe in? What do they believe in their person, in their gut, in their heart? And two, what are they doing about it? Susan?
Great. So I want to talk about, I believe in getting the right information to the right people when they need it. And that is one of my reasons I've been working on internet search for the past 5 years. I believe that it is critically important that people be able to find information, but that information isn't just static, but rather the information is created by people in response to economic incentives. So websites and news is created because they get an economic return, and that return comes from advertising dollars. So it's very important for them that advertising revenue generated is high. It's also really important that the products that people want to buy are out there and created. So all of the internet entrepreneurs that create things, that create new innovative products for people, those are created. For them, it's very important that advertising prices are low, and that advertising is very efficient, that they can reach the right consumer at the right time. What does that require? That requires a middleman who is fantastic in terms of algorithms and using data to get the right information to the right people. It also requires that that middleman doesn't take all of the surplus themselves, but rather that it gets shared out with the people who are trying to be matched. Where does that come from? That comes from competition. So that's why I work for Microsoft search engine, because they're the young, upstart, innovative competitor in the area of search that helps create that pressure. If you do have that competition, you get the innovation and you get the surplus distributed. That helps create the incentives for all of the content that we know and love on the internet. And it helps the incentives continue for venture capitalists to fund the next Kayak, the next Yelp, and so on, and knowing that they'll get the return on their investment and their innovation. I also believe in particular in the importance of news for democracy and for keeping governments honest around the world. And so with the internet there has been so transformative. It has made it so easy for people all around the world to make information available, for citizen reporters to get information out. And of course, it's been hugely disruptive to the traditional media. So I believe that it is extremely important to preserve somehow the incentives for the expensive investigative journalism that beyond what will be created by all of the citizen reporters out there. But we don't have easy answers there. This is a very intractable problem. So in this area, what am I doing about it? I'm doing research to try to study the impact of social media and news aggregators on the supply and demand of news, showing how, on the one hand, these forces are helping people discover sources of information that they never would have found, and causing people, therefore, to consume more news than they would have, because when the discovery costs are low, they can find what they're interested in. That increases incentives for people to create news. But on the other hand, the news outlets are losing their role as the curators of journalism. And because of that, they have less control, they have less of an incentive to create a reputation for quality and to cultivate the curation of high quality news across a range of topics, showing people things that they didn't even think that they might be interested in, giving them the news that's like their broccoli about maybe international news, topics that are a little hard to digest. And my concern is that the incentives to create those types of news may diminish over time.
Great. Frank?
Well, those are great points, and we're working to solve some of them at SocialFlow. What I believe and what we believe as a company, we're in the middle of one of those moments in human history when everything does change. There's never been a point in time like this where you could have access to so many people for so little cost at such an immediate interval. And we're sort of entering this time where you're having the traditional, pay-to-play, access-based networks being disrupted by things that there's no friction to get the message out there, no cost to really get it distributed, but the currency of the exchange is priced in terms of attention. And to your point, we are at one of those points where we can consume, fluffy, pop-based, easy-to-consume messages and sort of distract ourselves. Or we could use this time to sort of build trust and sort of, cooperation into these networks where they take the message and do something with it to make life a little bit better. And how do you do that? How do you get the conditions right for a network where you can have things that entertain you and keep you distracted, but then also get the things you want when you need them to do the things you want to do? And it's a pretty complex problem because you have, you can model off how well you'll compete now, but there's so much novelty and variance coming into all of media, but social in particular, where you can't predict an earthquake and what will happen after the earthquake if it happens, or if somebody gets assassinated, or things. All these things disrupt the way you allocate your attention. And as you get further into the future, the confidence at which you can predict how well you'll compete for that sort of falls off. So it's not a typical problem where you just look at the process and how things get distributed, and then you can sort of build risk into certain finite things happening. You actually have to take into account sort of the fact that there will be a point in time when the uncertainty takes over, and you have to look at how well you'll compete now and model out off of that, and just look at building worth into the distribution systems based around trust. And that's a function of what you expect the information to be used for. So, to summarize, we could use this time to waste a lot of time, and we could solve these problems so that we get worthless news out faster and we don't help each other as much. Or as people are self-organizing into groups and networks, we could find a way to communicate the information effectively so that people can then put some utility behind what they add. And it's a pretty interesting time to be working on the problem.
Okay, Tom.
So something I believe in and what I'm doing about it. Well, I'm a big believer that Silicon Valley and innovation is a more important force in the advertising and marketing business than maybe a power lunch on Madison Avenue. And it's why I live and work in Silicon Valley. And one of the things I'm doing about that is working with Sir Martin Sorrell of the WPP Group now to try to identify the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovation that can add value to our clients. And so we're launching WPP Ventures out in Silicon Valley to make investments in those kinds of companies. And I guess another thing I believe in is that the advertising industry, when I think of that, I think specifically of big advertisers and big agencies. Just like New York City maybe found out it wasn't ready for Hurricane Sandy, I don't think the ad industry is really ready for the next big tidal wave of change that's coming with mobile and social media and big data. And although it's certainly a topic that everyone's talking about, I'm not sure that they're thinking about it or ready for it in a way that that our company is. one of our big clients is Nike, and the Nike Chief Marketing Officer, Trevor Edwards, had a comment a while back about Nike's not in the business of supporting dying media companies. The role of advertising is not about financial support for the media industry. What he's interested in is finding deeper connection and engagement with Nike consumers. And so a lot of what we do for Nike isn't advertising. It's something that might create utility, like a mobile app like the Nike Training Club. And so I think we're more frequently working on apps than ads. And the most recent example of that is something called Nike Plus Connect Training for the Xbox 360, and it's a whole training program based on your own personal progress and your own workouts, and having the system giving you feedback and creating a better training, personalized training program for you. And a lot of what AKQA talks about with our customers is storytelling through software, and for us that means having a software engineer as integral part of the team as a copywriter might be on Madison Avenue. So those are the things that I think are important, and some of the things we're doing about it.
Great. So just for disclosure of biases, I should probably very quickly tell you what I believe in. I believe that it's absolutely atrocious that the most consumed media in the world, television, is just loaded with irrelevant, redundant ads, and that someone's got to fix it, and that what we've been doing on the web should be able to fix it by better leveraging data and technology. And so I left digital marketing after about 17 years to try to work on that. But I'm interested. I'm going to come back to you, Tom, and then I want to make this more freewheeling a bit. So you founded, built, and now have sold the largest digital advertising and marketing businesses ever created. On the buy side, or on the supporting the marketers, you are now part of the world's largest holding company in marketing services. What do you see are some of the critical issues when you go from being the entrepreneur attacking the citadel from outside to now sort of up in the top of the one of those towers looking out to the others being part of defending or growing the citadel?
Yeah, well, I think we'll probably always have more emotional resonance with David more than Goliath, but I think it's a matter of trying to bring a new voice to the key clients that are inside the group, some of which we already work with, like Unilever, that are among the largest advertisers in the world, Johnson & Johnson, clients that we have that are big WPP clients. But I think part of it is helping them navigate this change that's coming in terms of when you take a look at, the big famous chart was how much money was spent on digital advertising versus how much time was spent online. And, Mary Meeker's big analysis of, a $50 billion opportunity to close that gap. Well, I think that whole clock is being reset on mobile, for example, where if you think about how much time people spend with their mobile phone and how much interaction they have on that versus the tiny, tiny amount of advertising or marketing support that's going through mobile. I certainly get a lot of questions from people as to, when is mobile advertising going to start kicking in, and when are people going to get that? But I think for a lot of big advertisers, they're still just catching up with online advertising, search advertising, social media, and mobile is something that is just gotten so big so fast they haven't had time to keep up. But a lot of what we are trying to do is being the voice out there of talking about looking beyond that and looking towards how to create utility and information and entertainment in media, screens, and experiences that are what people are looking for, and less about supporting those media channels through advertising as the be-all and end-all solution.
Mm-hmm. Susan, how do you see having a role with the underdog in search, Microsoft? How do you see the issues from the smaller player trying to dislodge a larger player with an extraordinarily well-established business and whole ecosystem that's built around it? I mean, arguably a whole industry. with Google, because you might as well say names.
Exactly. Well, so one of the things about search advertising is that it's so data-driven, and the economies of scale are just so important. You have this huge long tail of advertisers and this huge long tail of keywords. About almost a third of the queries that come in from users are queries that you've never seen before, and many more are very rare. So you have to have enough data to really understand what people want, and you have to have enough scale to make it interesting to the advertisers. So that's been a challenge, one that Microsoft has been sort of chipping away at through huge amounts of investment, and the deal with Yahoo and so on that brought more traffic to the platform that got it to be more interesting to advertisers. The big challenge coming on the horizon is mobile. Mobile is sort of, in some sense, even more needful of scale, because you have not just the query, but where are you entering that query? So you need to now understand even more. People want to type in a smaller number of characters and so on. And then for the advertisers, there's this huge long tail that needs to come on board. So, Google has about 1 million advertisers, something like that. There's tens of millions of small businesses out there who just haven't really needed to engage with the internet so far. But now people are finding them through the mobile devices. So the new challenge coming up is that the mobile devices, the mobile search is going to cross PC search probably in 2 years or less. So, for your marketers...
When you say cross, do you mean in volume of searches?
Volume of searches, queries will be greater coming from mobile devices than PC, in about 2 years, plus or minus, depending on how these...
So if we created a new Mary Meeker slide, where would our lines be on volume of search and monetization of search?
Well, so I think this is where a big challenge is. First of all, even your big, advertisers who are spending large amounts of money, they haven't fully grasped the PC. And here this mobile form factor is extremely different. So on the one hand, you may access them through the apps, which in some sense may be more comfortable to them. But on the other hand, you still have all the search queries. You have the people trying to find the local stores. And so you have this new tail of advertisers that is that much less sophisticated, that is going to have that much less volume. And so it's going to be very hard to give them a return on their investment if they're just still getting a very small number of searches. But there's millions and millions of them that in aggregate are important for an advertising platform. So I think
I'm just not sure that search is a nut that the marketers haven't cracked. I think that they get it. And it took marketers a long time to understand television advertising and to have studies that said, you needed to have 75% at 3+ effective reach to be able to get your message across. And then that became a way to measure whether TV buys and campaigns were successful or not. And I think search is something that marketers get, and they get, if I put $1 in, I get what I'm getting back. I think the challenge is with social media, what does $1 spent get to me? What is what does Twitter or Facebook or what do these platforms get back to me? And then when you take that beyond to mobile advertising outside of search, then it's even, I think, more of a question mark of what's inside that black box and how do I evaluate those investments. But I don't think search from a marketer's standpoint is a challenge for rationalizing money that they spend on.
Well, so I guess maybe my point is that on the mobile side, I don't think anybody has come close to achieving the potential even within search. And I agree that search in some sense is the easiest thing to get. The attribution is the easiest. You have the most sort of direct connection between your dollars and the action the consumer's taking because it's right at the end of the funnel. But even on this sort of easy thing, it's just we're sort of selling the same product in mobile that we did on the PC, when in fact what the consumer is actually doing is quite different. So the attribution isn't there. A lot of the major firms haven't fully developed their ability to help advertisers understand the consumer moving between the different media, and they haven't figured out how to actually do the attribution in the mobile space. So I think this is, and then you're going to have this whole new set of customers, these millions of customers to come on board who haven't been part of the ecosystem so far. So I think this is an opportunity. I want to emphasize it for the folks out here who are in the investment community and so on, because I just see a lot of untapped potential right now.
Yeah, I would say the mobile side of marketing, it's not really a search problem. Like it's there's mobile search, of course, and then there's things based on the local context of where you are, but the device lives with you, and it's probably more like social than it is like search, because there's so many things you can do, and there's a radius of things around you that you can interact with, and it's more of a ordinal ranking matching problem than based on things you already know and things that you're already inclined to do. And so there's the I'll go find it, like the aggressive, go after it, search-based direct marketing model. But there's probably way more opportunity in the fact that there's passive discovery and services that can be presented to you. And really the tiebreaker in those things is, how much do I want them? And I didn't know about them, but now you're offering it to me. So it follows people-based rules, social rules, because you're a person and you're out living, and instead of following these mechanical, completely algorithmic end-to-end routing problems, what you want to do is find ways to improve people's lives by introducing these things, but also having enough novelty so that there's new things to discover and things get better, so you get more effective at introducing things into the platform.
So I'm going to move us to a little different bend here, and move a little now bigger picture on the media industry. And this isn't one we didn't prep for this one. So clearly, I think we're all hearing and understand that there's really significant disruption affecting the media industry and the media. And right now I'm going to talk about media owners, so the people that are producing content or distributing content, news, information, entertainment. One of the things that has struck me that's become quite obvious over the last few years is how many of these businesses, even some of the most successful ones, have been largely held up or propped by a subsidiary division that may not have even been core to their business when they acquired it, but kept funding them to keep going. And so I'll use an example that the Washington Post company has largely been fueled for certainly the last decade by Kaplan. Disney, all you had to do was look at the earnings reports to realize the power of ESPN. Is supporting a lot of the whole Disney family. And actually the Hearst company was able to support its newspapers much more robustly and longer because of its investment in ESPN. And so I want to put that out there because I'd like to hear some predictions on what kinds of things you think might happen to companies that we see as incumbents today that may have a difficult time surviving tomorrow, and B, what might be the kinds of areas that the media companies, if we think some of these content owners may own adjacent businesses that become fuel for them to continue their business because they're adjacent, may be looking to invest in going forward.
Well, you were talking about television, and anything I've read says that the amount of time that people consume video, if you think more broadly, is growing, not shrinking. And when you think about it, devices that you can watch video are multiplying, and as more and more people have smartphones and as bandwidth increases, the idea that you have to be sitting in front of a television set to watch television is going out the window. So I just wonder to what extent the fact that people are going to have so much freedom and so much choice about video content and 24/7 availability, how is that going to further disrupt what has been the bedrock of the advertising business in terms of broadcast television and all the advertising dollars into broadcast television? How is that going to shift when Netflix and Amazon and Xbox and everyone else is streaming all kinds of video content 24/7? So that's something I don't think people necessarily would think about because people see television budgets and revenue still going up.
So where should the video companies be making their bets and their investments with that anticipation of proliferation of screens, fragmentation of audiences, more digitization and distribution?
Well, there's a big rumor out recently that Microsoft was going to buy Netflix. Maybe it should be Hearst or ABC or somebody like that should buy Netflix instead, because that's going to be an installed base that is used to watching streaming content that may not be tied to advertising revenue.
Yeah, that seems right. I mean, it's anybody that has a business based off predictable access to the consumer, they're in trouble. So I'm 36 years old, and I don't know a single person in my peer group that watches a episode of anything at the time that it aired. And so they're moving away from these predictable places to reach people, and you just have to compete basically on merit and where you can fit into people's lives. And so having a content company that then gets the method of distribution where you can reach people when they want to be reached, like that makes sense. But relying on people to pick up something for a subscription or to watch something when it airs, and to the point earlier, I think it's not going to, as a prediction, it's not going to move linearly. There's going to be a dam that breaks and all of a sudden it's going to fall off the other side, because I don't think that once people realize that there's no predictable future value in the method of advertising that way, you're going to see dollars shifting out to find new homes that have a potentially bigger upside. Like, I think probably eventually the people buying ads look more like a venture capital firm than they do a typical media buying outfit. So.
What does The Economist think of that?
I think you guys, you've covered a lot of the issues. Maybe going back to sort of the traditional news industry, you know, we are going to see just an inability to support the cost structures that were there in the past, the revenue streams, you know, falling, and again, with the consumers switching more and more across media outlets, a lot more competition, and therefore lower advertising prices, and even the efficiency of the targeted advertising won't necessarily see the kinds of revenue streams that outlets have had in the past. So consolidation and, you know, losing some of those fixed costs.
Let me push on this a little bit. So let's just think about the election that we just went through. You know, certainly most of my friends, peers, and, you know, people I know around the business were probably following the election as much or more in their Twitter feed, as opposed to, let's say, CBS. So if if the future may not be supporting Scott Pelley of CBS and his probably $10 million a year contract, but actually you could follow Nate Silver for free. You could actually then read a little bit more about it on the blog for $70 a year, you know, through the New York Times company. Might that be a different model? One of the things that I'm struck by, and this would be an interesting one to think about because we talked a little bit about it ahead of time, you know, the analog media world was a world where distribution was scarce, but attention was plentiful. If you put a message out there, it was seen. But in the digital media world, distribution is plentiful, its attention is scarce. So let's look at Tumblr. Tumblr reaches, I believe, about 700 million people in the world every month. And it generates about 5 billion page views, I think. I don't have the exact number, per month. And it does that with about 130 employees. And most of, you know, half of those employees were only hired in the last 9 months, so they're not even productive. So probably 75 productive employees. Now, I ran strategy at AOL when we had 11,000 people, and we only had about 2 or 3 billion page views across all of our properties. So one of the questions is maybe you don't have the monetization, but then you don't have the cost either. So how do we all see that play?
Except maybe trying to follow monetization is the wrong rabbit hole to go down. The conversation this morning was about if it's free, you can't measure it. And I think the fact that Twitter is free freaks out advertisers because you know, it's like, where am I going to put my advertising dollars? You know, how can I monetize Tumblr? How do I monetize social media? And so the influence of social media, I think, is huge, and the reach is huge, and the amount of time people spend is huge. But the dollars are small, and somehow, as an industry, we're saying, well, it must not be that important. It must not work. It must not, because where's the dollars? But you know, that's one of the ways where I think the change is coming faster than we can keep up with it, because it's not about, you know, following ad dollars to necessarily follow influence and, you know, what really engages audiences.
I would just also say I'm very interested in the phenomenon of, you know, social media as a curator of news, and I think it's going to become very important. But actually, our little bubbles are not introspection isn't necessarily the best way to look at that point right now, because all of our friends post very clever and interesting news articles on Facebook and Twitter and so on. But actually, when you kind of look at the data, it's still the case that most people get their news, sort of their online news, in more traditional ways. So, but there's a small set of people who are starting to get a big share of their news from referrals through social media and so on, but it's still sort of a little bit more kind of concentrated. You know, it's a smaller set of people who are very intense users, and there's a big mass of people who haven't quite moved there yet. But it's coming very fast.
But I'm sort of, maybe we have the opposite effect that Frank had just mentioned about how so many in traditional media, it may be very slow until it's very fast, the decline. And maybe the same. I mean, I'm struck by the fact I'm from a very small coal town in western Pennsylvania that's got an average household income of probably 30,000, and so it's a pretty poor area. But over the last 9 months, the explosion that I have seen on Facebook of people I graduated high school with that are now on Facebook. And this is a place that has broadband penetration of about 20%, 15%.
So are you being stalked by coal miners now?
You know, exactly. The ads I'm getting now, yes, you know, from the election ads. But I think that, you know, they were probably the influencers. Instead, it's not one newspaper, it may be 5% of the people. But it has the potential, I think, to have massive impacts on how people are getting their information.
Well, I think there's a major disruption where maybe you can't measure it in ad dollars, but you certainly can measure it in allocation of time. And what you look at the way people trade off their time, what were they doing before versus what they're doing now, that is measurable and that is impactful to brands. And I think to your point, you've made a point very early on here where the reason why I think it's going to break so quickly at the end there is you're going to have brands with these big dollars that sustain non-viable methods of advertising just for the sake of it being predictable and an outlet. And then the minute that becomes non-sustainable in itself, when it pays to switch and you have to do it, you're going to pull the dollars out and they're going to go someplace else. Where they go is is an open question. But you're going to have people investing in methods of advertising that just don't pay. For the sake of that, you can actually measure them. And I think, you know, once that's not there, it gets a little more unpredictable.
Tom?
Yeah, well, I was thinking what you said earlier at lunch about Craigslist. Who would have thought this little website in San Francisco with the funky guy with the beret that didn't have an enormous revenue model was going to kill the United States newspaper industry, and that was going to kill classified advertising. And if you think about all the money that went into classified advertising versus the amount of money that goes into Craigslist, it doesn't make sense if you're trying to analyze, a rational flow of dollars. And I just wonder if there are things that we don't even see now in social media and mobile, they're going to kill other businesses, get them blindsided because it's free.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's, I guess, what some venture capitalists have called the $0 billion markets, where Craigslist has displaced probably $15 billion worth of advertising for a business that probably isn't generating more than about $150 million in cash, though it's probably doing that against only $40 million of cost. So it's an extraordinarily profitable, much, much smaller business.
Right. Well, as the economist, of course, the social value created is extraordinary. So people aren't paying the price for it. So you're not seeing the consumer utility. So
it's interesting. I'm interested. So let's think about it in this way. Where's that being displaced? If people are going to have to pay less for content and advertisers will be having to pay less because they can get free distribution, where's the displaced opportunity?
Well, so I think it can be tempting to kind of just think, okay, money was here and it goes somewhere else, but you can also just have people getting different shares of a pie. So the people who were selling through classifieds keep more of the pie, and the consumers keep more of the pie, and the middleman got squeezed out. So competition can do that. I mean, there's no sort of law that says middlemen have to take a huge chunk of the surplus along the way.
I think this is good. I really think this is good because, if we'd have just gone along and with people bemoaning the loss of that, there'd be a giant telephone operator industry right now instead of Google or something like that, where now that went someplace else, and because that thing that didn't have much utility is gone, there's a better way to do it. Maybe, and I don't know this is what everybody wants to hear, but maybe instead of spending on advertising, you can spend it on the product itself and the people that need to make the differentiated product.
What's interesting, so I'm gonna, if I get to the microphone, and he doesn't, Mark Bonchek doesn't know he's gonna be called on yet, but I'd like the microphone up in his hand, please. But it's interesting, Walmart announced this year that it was gonna take $1 billion of profit and put it back into price reduction rather than marketing. And that's what it was gonna do. It felt it wins on price and went, so, how it displaces. But so when Mark and I met here a year ago, he was running community networks and its development for Sears Holding, Sears and Kmart. So we have someone who's a marketer who has dealt with this. So I'd be very interested in your perspective on what was just being talked about here and how you see this.
Well, I would just say, first of all, a lot of the things about the medium is the message, and we're moving from a one-to-many world to a many-to-many world. That's back to McLuhan and Innes and where that came from. And what does it mean to be in a many-to-many world where people can connect with each other? So I completely agree with everything that's been saying. The one part I would say is where the money goes. It definitely comes out of advertising, but I don't think it necessarily goes into the product. I think it goes into the relationship, because that's what's changed, is the relationship between the brand and the individual. And so the question becomes how we use data, how we use all the other things we've been talking about to change the nature of the relationship between the brand and the consumer, not as a passive audience, but as a co-creator.
Right, but I think the social contract used to be, you have content, you have news, you have pretty pictures of new dresses in magazines, I have my attention and time I'm going to give you, and I don't mind watching a commercial or seeing a print ad because you're giving me that. And I just wonder if that is thrown out the window because there's a different exchange and a different value exchange. I can get all this stuff free now. I can find out everything I want is free. So where's the exchange going to be? And I just wonder if those things are, I'm going to give you my data if you give me something in return. I'm going to give you my attention if you give me free wireless or free cell phone. What are the things where people want that they're spending a lot of money on right now? Maybe it's the phone companies and the cable companies that are going to be, the next, someone else is going to say, I'll give you what they're giving you, but you're going to need to have some advertising attached to it.
And of course it does go out the window, because before you'd buy a billboard because you drove past it and you had to drive past it because you were going, and you advertised on TV because you had to tune in to TV to watch the show, and I was able to get you there. You don't even need to read the entire magazine anymore. Like, you can get it bit by bit online, and the monetization is moving over there, and you can get it piece by piece. So the switching costs you nothing to divert your attention to something else, and there's no contract that I will definitely get you at that spot for that reason. So maybe it is the relationship, but it can't be predicated on reaching you in some predictable way.
No, I assume that's a fuel band on your wrist with Nike. That's the new model. That's the new
awesome,
advertising, right? That's what I mean by a relationship. It's not the product. They may make money off of that, but it's a different relationship
They're
that
hoping
Nike
to.
has with you. Yeah. But it's much bigger than that, is my point. It's that you now are connected into a kind of ecosystem that has you naturally buy shoes and apparel and equipment because you're pulled into I call it their orbit.
Yeah, so I want to hand this back to someone right behind you who has a real perspective as a media owner. And Mike, if you could identify yourself and then tell us your perspective on this, since you're on the media owner side.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dave. I'm Mike Federley, the Chief Operating Officer for Forbes Media. And an interesting conversation that, to me, first from a media owner's point of view, has to be viewed as looking at the end of your own sort of what got you to the party and coming to terms with that. If that, before you can come up with answers to any of those solutions or possibilities of where it's all going. And that, I think, is kind of the first step to getting to a solution. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but that, I think, is kind of the first most important step.
Yeah, so if you could keep handing it back to your right to Avner, because I'd like to have, I think someone we've got an opinion on what may be the future of television and video when it's available in a more distributed way. So Avner, I want you to tell folks who you are and your perspective on the future of video.
So I'm Avner Ronen. I'm founder and CEO of Boxy. We just launched a new device last week that sells at Walmart. So you can go to Walmart not far from here and pick one up. And what it does, it's a hybrid device. It brings you the broadcast channels, ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, and Netflix and YouTube and Pandora and Spotify. And it has a cloud DVR, so the device has no storage, and it uploads your recording to the cloud, and you can watch them on your iPad, and you can record as much as you like. So, our focus is on the TV screen, has been for a while, and the way we view the future of video is a lot of it is still dependent on the content. What we found is our original device was a pure cord cutter device. It was pure over the top, and it only got you access to Netflix and YouTube and so on. And what we found out is that, while it's nice, it's really niche. People still want to watch, American Idol, and they want to watch the local news, and they want to watch a lot of content that is just not available over the top just yet. And the other thing that we figured out, so that's why we, with the new device, we introduced the ability to access that content. The other thing we figured out is the fact that the device is connected doesn't change the psychology of the user when he sits down on the sofa. And we had a lot of icons on our screen and a lot of options to browse content, and we had over 400 apps. And what we found out is that it degrades the experience. It doesn't make it better. People just want to sit in front of the TV and watch something. And TV does that great today. And we just took, a lot of us in the industry of connected TV just took the paradigm of the iPad or the iPhone and just put a bunch of logos on the screen, and that's just not the future of television. So we think the future of television as a screen, as a big screen, is that it's going to be very much like it is today. The screen is going to be thinner and bigger, but it's still going to be all about the video. A lot of other stuff is going to happen on the second screen, but on the TV screen, it's going to be all about the video. So in that sense, we have a traditional point of view of the world. But we think the sources of content, the video that comes to that screen, not necessarily is going to come from cable or satellite. A lot of it is going to come over the internet. So the experience is going to remain the same. The sources of the content is going to get different. And obviously, people are going to watch it on more devices. And I feel, I don't want to take over the conversation, but I feel a lot of the conversation today around the traditional media is we're trying to fight yesterday's war based on yesterday's terms. So, that the show is 30 minutes long and is broadcast once a week, and that's the way you monetize it, and that's the way you aggregate into channels, and that's the way you aggregate channels into a media company. And I think the internet is going to change all that over time. I don't think the incumbent structure is going to change for the foreseeable future. It's going to stay about the same until there's going to be real breakout moments where the whole way in which content is going to be monetized is going to be different. So take American Idol as an example. The fact that it monetizes through some voting on SMS and ads is really dated. In my opinion, it's a huge brand with huge consumer engagement. They just monetize in a very old-fashioned way.
Yeah. So let's assuming Avner's vision of this marketplace happens. And let's go down the line here. How do you see, Susan? How do how can you imagine that market will change or disrupt if we see essentially a breaking of, let's say the video or television industry and the companies that are providing into that infrastructure today?
Well, so I think one of the things that we've been talking about as an industry for a long time, but still hasn't fully come together, is just how we get the right ads to the right people at the right time, using all the data that we have about people. And it's amazing still, that how inefficient the advertising is you get through video. So presumably, as it comes to the internet, it'll change. And it's kind of amazing to me that it hasn't changed faster, in a sense, but there's a lot of reasons for that, that having to do with the technology and the structure of the industry and so on. And then once that becomes the case, who's going to be the ad platform? Who's going to have the data? And again, are the middlemen, how big a cut do the middlemen get? And from an economics perspective, the middlemen get a very big cut if they have unique access to data, and they have really the unique ability to do the matching and to get the answer right and to do the attribution and so on. If there are competing platforms that have similar access to data, or the data isn't owned by the ad platform, then we can see a lot more of the rents getting distributed and providing the incentives for their production. So I think to me, that's one of the big open questions.
I think once you're watching something, it's a very strong predictor that you want to keep watching it. And people engage with TV the way you say. No one likes to be interrupted. I've never heard anyone that wants to sit down and watch a whole bunch of TV commercials. But so I think the way this whole thing
Super Bowl, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in that case, but not normally. You don't sit down with the family.
What if every day was the Super Bowl in TV advertising?
It would get old. You wouldn't want to do it. I mean, I think you want to get into something, get involved with the story. It's a great, TV's a great way to passively sit back and engage with a story. I think all the innovation and stuff moves into the second screen because that's where you can effectively, A, compete for attention, but B, do things that improve the life of the type of person that watches that show. And I think things move out of the interruption economy and into the way to marginally improve people's experience of watching the show. And I think there's a whole realm of innovation that's about to come on the back of that, and I'm actually, frankly, looking forward to it.
Well, I think broadcast video is still where brands are going to spend most of their money, and they're going to want to be with high-quality content. And so, that's not really going to change. But I do think, to what your point was, the models for how we get there might change. Netflix is coming out with David Fincher's new series, House of Cards, and I think they're going to launch all 13 episodes on day one, which is a more modern way of consuming a serial program. So that's something different. I just noticed during the World Series that when you wanted to watch a game, and you want to see the San Francisco Giants win in 4 games straight, that Major League Baseball still has pay gates if you want to go on a different device than watching it on television. So you have to have cable at home, and then you've got to have an MLB contract to watch it on a mobile device. And I think those are kinds of things that need to change because people still want to watch sports, but it should be I think a better experience to go from device to device. And then just for example, we're talking about the second screen. Everyone's going to have a mobile device in their lap watching television. So it's not just going to be sitting on the sofa. It's always going to be sitting on the sofa with a tablet or a mobile phone in your lap, and I don't think all of that's been worked out. How does that add value to the equation? How does a marketer or advertiser take advantage of that? So I do think that all these changes are happening faster than we can keep up with, making media more relevant.
But certainly the marketers are going to have to do a much better job of really inviting the users in, because if the users don't want to engage in the ads, they find ways around it. And so this is really the ads providing an invitation to you to interact in some other way, which, similar to mobile, new attribution models will come into play. And then, if one action is, downloading an app, how valuable is that you now have this relationship with your customer? So in some sense, you can see, competing very hard to have the opportunity to get someone to form that relationship, at which point you don't need to be out there trying to acquire that consumer anymore. You've got them with your app and you own them. So you're going to have to, in some sense, work harder to find them and attract them to you. And I'm interested in the distributional consequences of this as well, because it's a product that you use more often, or a product that is very important to you, that's worth downloading an app, that's worth making a relationship over. But then the long tail of products that you consume rarely, you don't want to bother with an app. And so then the discovery process and the advertising process for them is quite different.
So I'd like to open up to some questions. So I called on people, but I would like people to, right here, if we could.
Mark Mahaney. Television advertising has continued to rise. Ratings for the last year have started to sustainably decline. So when does television marketing spend crack? And then I know you've kind of touched on a little bit, but maybe a little bit more specific in the predictions. Where do those dollars go, or do they just disappear, like happened in part with Craigslist and classified advertising?
So I think, sorry.
I was just going to throw, right, one thing I want to say before they answer it is interesting to note that on the Mary Meeker slide that's very famous, she shows the TV is 1% under invested in relative to time spent.
So I think one of the things that we haven't talked about too much today is sort of the tail content of video. So in some sense, one of the promise of the new ad platforms and getting content over the internet is that while your top brands really want to be associated with good content, your direct marketers are more interested in who the person is. And so in principle, that allows tail content to monetize at levels that are not as disparate from the head content as has in the past. And it's taken some time for that to come together, but that's the introduction of more direct marketing dollars to very well targeted advertising, where you then can measure an action, an interaction with the brand, or seeking more information on your second screen. All of those types of things. Again, we've been talking about them for years. We can sort of see them coming, but it still seems to me like at some point that is going to break open, and that's going to shift the incentives for content production, as well as bring in a different mix of advertising dollars than in the past.
I think some of them go away. But if TuneIn is going down, by definition, they have to shift the dollars into discovery mechanisms. So it's good to be Facebook, Twitter, and Google still. But I think you got to get people at the top of the funnel then at that case. And so as TuneIn starts to trail off, you have to invest more to get people to tune in, and that flows to discovery.
I wonder if there isn't something about the whole dual screen phenomenon that marketers still want the big audiences that are watching American Idol or Monday Night Football, but maybe they're going to be shifting some of those dollars out of buying 30-second commercials and shifting them into experiences that are going to be, joined up at the hip. So as you're watching the game, you're having an experience that Bud Light is sponsoring, and you're seeing a Bud Light TV commercial, but maybe there's going to be fewer commercials and more content, utility, information. Maybe it's going to be a special fantasy football app that provides great value and would cost a lot of money to run for Anheuser-Busch, but that might be a way that I'm still talking to that same audience. They're still engaging in the same behaviors, but they've also now got something else on their lap that I can engage with them.
One more point to that, though.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And that's TuneIn may be going down for things that you'd expect and predict them to be, but I don't think people aren't tuning in. They're just doing something else. So that's a signal that people want to do something different, and they're opening up to being able to find new content. But I think all the data says that people are still tuning into video more than ever. It's just probably different video.
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's like a heavy rotation out of broadcast prime into cable networks and smaller cable networks and smaller tail. But right back here, we have another question.
Hi, yeah, Ben Wu is my name. Two quick questions. The first
and who are you with?
Neurolytics, a market research firm. First quick question is, how much of your comments are US or North American centric? And secondarily, as we look at the globalization as a result of the internet and that second screen, how much does advertising have to change to be global and be able to be consumed by people in different countries, cultures, languages, etc.?
Well, I'll throw one thing in just because I used to sell transnational advertising, so I've lived with that. We still have very few companies in the world that have a product that can be bought, consumed, sold, serviced in a same or similar way in many multinational markets. And so I would at least first start with, I don't know that we're going to see that many global advertising and global advertising budgets, because you have to interact, sell, price, service, deliver, distribute differently market by market.
And I just inject, I've worked with Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Unilever, the global advertisers. They don't spend money globally. The money is all down in the regions and the countries. So there are not big global budgets right now, but the big global advertisers. Not anytime soon.
I think it's actually, the trend is the other way. We actually used to have a lot more global budgets 25 years ago than we have today, because much more power has been pushed down to the local markets, the localized things. Now, probably the one product that is a bit different is media. And I think if you look at the one success of CBS networks most recently, is the fact that CBS no longer has to deficit finance its large primetime shows, because it has produced them in a way that they can be sold outside the United States immediately. And like, The Good Wife, Hawaii Five-0, The Mentalist, they were all profitable before they even launched in the US, because they've been sold globally. And if you look in movies, for example, we have the US movie industry. I mean, James Bond did $80 million in the US in the first weekend, but it did 300 million outside of the US on simultaneous release. And in markets like China, it's not releasing them on screens. It's using things like Youku.com, where people pay a one-time fee because there are not enough screens to show the James Bond movie to reach as many people that would want it. So some of the digital and tangible products maybe, but I think actually it's going to be less globalization and more localization.
Can I just pitch in here? So it was interesting to learn yesterday afternoon that Microsoft was not a consumer products company. I think that, again, comes back to the little bubble we live in. Maybe all of our friends have MacBooks. I even do see a few Windows laptops running around this conference. But, you know, globally, he's got a Surface. Awesome. You can come check out my Surface later. But, you know, around the world, many people...
Former Microsoft employee.
Exactly. You know, around the world, there are a lot of consumers out there with Windows laptops and so on, and with Microsoft software. I want to mention that as we move to you know, software as a service and cloud-provided software, there's a whole new approach that can come alive in developing countries. So in developing countries, people are skipping the PC, they're skipping the laptop, they're skipping the TV, but they've got a mobile. And so when we talk about the marketing, you know, there haven't actually been so many opportunities to reach all those individuals. Of course, they haven't got a lot of disposable income, but there still are there's still participants in an economy, and there's still opportunities to reach these people. And then there are services that are being provided. And of course, you're not going to be able to charge an enormous amount for those services, but advertising is an obvious way to monetize the fact that your product is being used in China and in India and all of these places. But at the moment, not a lot of people are paying for it.
But some of the marketers in those markets are topping up mobile accounts if you watch advertising, or giving you free time on a you know, multiplayer video game if you're downloading codes from the inside of a Coke cap. So I think they are experimenting more with different value exchanges aside from, you know, here's a banner ad on my small
Okay,
or
so we only have
less to reach them. It costs less to reach them, and you know more about them. So why not get better at talking to them the way they prefer to be talked to?
Yeah.
Like,
so we only have 30 seconds, and so I want to finish on one thing. You also didn't prep this. So I want you to predict that what is the most powerful media company in the world in 2020. And you both need to name the company, and you can define what you mean by powerful. So I'm not going to set that. You can determine what you think is powerful. And so, because I see you already thinking hard about it, Tom, it's going to start with you.
Okay,
I'm going to give my time back.
I'd say Apple, you know, because of the multiple platforms that they own and their bank account.
Okay, Frank?
I agree. I think they have a good vertical chain. I think somebody that teams up with Apple that furthers the discovery process will do pretty well, so Facebook or Twitter. But I think Apple has it right, and it's a good way to discover things that improve your life, and they have the physical device to be right there.
You can't say Microsoft.
Yeah.
I think we'll just close it on that. We'll see.
Well, I'll offer one because, so I have to offer one that's a little bit different. So I'm going to say Amazon, and I'm going to say Amazon because actually it was a point I hadn't thought about that last week I heard in an interview with Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures, who pointed out that Amazon today is more dominant in web services provision than Google is in search. And so I think the capacity for a company that's becoming a massive retailer, starting to move video into its platform in a heavy way, has more information on more people, more data, unique access, has the capacity in 8 years to be the most powerful media company. So we thank you, everybody, for your attention and being part of this, and thanks very much to the panel.